Economy Forum videocast. Often on these videocasts, we have Tondo Institute fellows as guests, but once a month, Tondo Institute takes it over, so to speak, and we work together with WTEF to produce a videocast, hopefully helpful and instructive videocast on a topic that the Tondo Fellows have been thinking about. And happy today to have Tondo Fellows Victoria Crittenden and Sharif Rana with us, and friend of Tondo, Richard Krusen. And just to introduce the topic, the Tondo Institute has been putting out a lot of material about resilience, and in particular, urban climate resilience. Now, resilience means bouncing forward to a trajectory that gets you back on the organizational goals and mission. But a precondition to bouncing back after a problem is that you recognize that a problem exists. And today we're going to talk about this prerequisite, spurred by an editorial in Scientific American called Peak Denial. And it means that we recognize problems too late. This could be because we get messages from corporations and governments that deliberately or otherwise minimize or deny the problem or shift the blame for a problem. It could be because of social atomization, and we don't speak to our friends about what we really think about these problems. So in the context of our recent big problems, the COVID epidemic and the changing climate of the Earth, all these things have probably had an impact on our inability to grab the problem by the horns. We have corporations trying to tell us that it's climate change is our fault rather than theirs. We had a government that recognized the COVID crisis too late. And these are some of the things that are happening. Now, a question that I'm particularly interested in is individual psychological denial is, I think, a very well understood topic. The Scientific American article implied that that the what would you say, the interpersonal and social growth of denial that results in societal denial, that there's a body of research about this, but there were no links. So I'm just very curious how personal denial propagates out into a social phenomenon. And maybe some of our panelists have an idea about that. But the questions I had put to the panel in advance include that one, and what are the roots of peak denial psychology? What are some other examples of it aside from the climate problem and the pandemic? I had also circulated an article about the so-called kidult phenomenon, meaning that young folks in our society today stay in a juvenile mode for many more years than they used to do. And does this have an effect on people's ability to take responsibility for a problem? And the final question is then, what could be done about all this? Okay. So I will hand the discussion over to our panelists for initial statements. And then, as usual in these video casts, we'll have a second round of comments in which the panelists can react to things that other panelists have said and offer their final comments. And I'll ask each panelist to give a little self-introduction to go beyond what I've said about them. Vicki, would you like to take it away? You're muted.
Yeah, no, sure thing. I was just juggling things. So it's great to be here. I'm excited to be a part of this group. I am a professor of marketing at Babson College in Wellesley, Massachusetts. I'll be really honest here and say that whenever I was thinking about this and thinking about it from my own perspective, I will say that I approach
Oh, you're frozen, Vicki.
a teaching and learning perspective. Might be a little bit different from some other people on the panel. So, Fred, I don't know if you want me to go ahead and give some thoughts now or go through an
Yes,
introduction of everyone. Go ahead and give my thoughts on this.
please do.
So when I was thinking about this as an educator, I feel like that I have a lot of responsibility here because I'm getting these Fred, as you referred to them, and as one of the articles referred to, or a lot of articles talk about the kidult. But I thought I would start out with something from a marketing perspective, and we're thinking about these bigger, or if you want to refer to them as, excuse me, these wicked problems. And part of this that, excuse me, that we've touched, that gets touched on is we don't take the time to read the full story. We don't take the time to dig into, if you will, we don't take the time to triangulate. So we'll see something, it grabs our attention, and either we run with it or we don't. And I think that's the nature of where we are in society today. Give it to me and give it to me quick, and maybe I'll run with it, and maybe I won't. And we might say as a researcher, it's our responsibility to dig into something and see, what are the valid points? What points are opinions, someone's opinions, and I don't think we take the time to do that. So I think that that's a big part of what's going on. In the grand scheme of things, though, as someone who's looked at some of the big problems and someone who's played around in the political world, I mean, cover-ups themselves are not new. So when something happens and it gets covered up through a lot of really good marketing efforts, let's say, that's not new. But then historically, there would have been a lot of people who would have been questioning that. I think in today's world, people either run with it or they just shut it down and don't think about it. So I guess my first point is this idea that cover-ups are not new, whether it's related to COVID, whether it's related to climate change, things get said, things get covered up. But as I was thinking about this topic, and it actually took me back to something that it was one of those signs I had read, and you've probably all seen it. It says, I want it and I want it now. And I think societally, that's where we live. And that is where people's brains are. And people as a whole, I will say, people who are younger than I, how's that? I want it and I want it now. And as I was thinking about this, and I mentioned this movie in my class last week, and I had a bunch of 19-year-olds looking at me like, yeah, I've never heard of that movie. So it kind of, I'm hesitant to bring a movie that was called Failure to Launch. And I think we're living in a society of a lot of failure to launch. I actually enjoyed that movie because my sons had graduated. One had graduated high school, in college. Kids were moving moving out of the house, but I had a very mature adult son who wanted to move back home. And one of my sisters actually bought him that movie, Failure to Launch. And it's funny, it throws an interesting twist on things, but it gets at this idea that and so it makes me think about it as an educator, and I'm at fault for some of that. In the classroom, in my teaching, I'm a big contributor to grade inflation. Oh, you want a B? And I'm thinking the old Vicky would have said, well, that B is that's a very good grade in my class. So you're going to have to work really hard. But the Vicky of the 21st century is that Vicky that says, I'm not going to fight that battle. It's not worth it to me to fight that battle. You know, that it's out there. I have to be a part of the grade inflation regime, or I'm the one who gets punished. And I'll give you this one example that came up recently. We were in class and I was talking about what should be rational decision making on the part of a consumer. And so one of the assignments my students had was, it's an AI generated assignment. So based on their responses, everybody's interaction can be different. But what the simulation is doing is it's taking the students as a consumer through a rational decision-making process. And AI can tell you, given this rational process, what would be the optimal choice here. And I had a couple of students who made what would be a suboptimal decision, without calling it a wrong decision, but it's suboptimal. Two students met with me after the simulation, and the question was, well, what they posed to me is, that was my decision. How could it be wrong? How could I only get partial credit for my decision? And I tried to walk the students through what we would use in marketing as a compensatory model or a non-compensatory model. So I said, if you follow that compensatory modeling process, the attributes were getting thrown out along the way in your decision-making process, but at the end, you made a suboptimal decision, even based on the process that you went through. And both of them said, but that's still what I would do, so why do I only get partial credit? And I wanted to say, because that's the real world. I'm not just going to give you something because that's what you wanted. But so I face this constantly. And so then it frightens me, is these are kids, these are young adults who are going out and will soon be involved in issues related to climate change or whatever the next pandemic concern is. And it's so, just shut it out, because it becomes, well, this is what I would do. Why do I have to follow a rational decision-making process? And so I again thought about it as a teaching and learning, and I'll toss this over to the next person in just a second. But I've been intrigued by this kidult phenomenon. I guess we could. And I feel like what I talked about leads into the kidult phenomenon, but as a marketer, that has become a huge market segment for us. I mean, toy companies are actually out there right now in 2024 focused on this kidult marketplace. But it's interesting, and I'll use the example of Legos. I mean, Legos are now being brought into this whole kidult worlds because we as adults say, well, engaging, I won't use the word playing, but engaging with Legos can be relaxing. Engaging with Legos can bring about creativity. And all that is fine, and we as marketers are going to cater to that. But what happens is that we actually, I think, further that we make that leap even broader from being that kid with engagement to actually being that adult where everything can't be fun and great. And some might play that off with the Kidult world and let's say with the toy example as nostalgia. And now you'll read with some of the self-help, the self-care is that nostalgia now is a part of self-care. And I'm fine with that if it's great for your well-being. And but it's being now becoming a part, this Kidult world is becoming a coping mechanism. And so I get it. I get it as a marketer, and I get this as an educator, but I'm not sure that's helping us tackle those wicked problems later on. So I know that was long and rambling, but these are thoughts that jump out at me with this. Thank you.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you. And I think everybody's seen that story on the internet where a teacher asks little Johnny, "How do you spell chair?" And Johnny misspells it, and the teacher says it's wrong. And Johnny says, "That you ask me, how do I spell it?"
Exactly.
Right. So maybe one lesson is that we ask the wrong questions.
Mhm.
If we had said, Johnny, what is the correct way to spell chair? We might have got a different answer. Well, I would like to now hand the mic over to our psychologist in Albuquerque here, Richard. Would you take it away?
Certainly. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay.
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah, just as a little introduction, I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist. I've been in practice for about 35 years or so. I am not an academic psychologist. I've always been a clinician. And so my perspective tends to be more on the granular level, dealing with individuals and how they cope and how they don't cope and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, I certainly can see some parallels through my practice with some of the problems that we're talking about here and some of the concepts. As you were speaking, Victoria, one of the things that struck me is that when I was in college, one of the most valuable classes that I took was logic, where I learned how to process things in a more logical, rational way and learn how to recognize illogical statements and so on. And also, as a psychologist, a lot of what we did was we learned the scientific method for dealing with things. And when COVID came along, I guess I was struck by the large percentage of people that had not only no concept of what science is or the scientific method, but actually demonized it and created this whole culture where if you wore a mask or did anything like that, there was something wrong with you. You were part of the liberal world. And to me, that was just ridiculous because, if you have a virus and it's being spread by breathing on people and sneezing on people, why wouldn't you protect yourself from that? I mean, it just made no sense. So anyway, one of the things that I was thinking in terms of how to deal with some of this is I really wish that logic and scientific method was taught in a more global way to college students and graduate students and so on, because so much of what you see on the internet and on television are clear examples of errors in logic. So kind of going back to some of what was written, I really like the opinion piece about peak denial, because when I look at the way the world approaches things these days, so much of what is put out to the world through internet and so on are just little sound bites. People don't really look at things in more complex ways. They also will be bombarded by things. Like my wife loves to watch TikTok videos, and as you know, those are just little short bites of information, and so she will come to me and say, well, did you hear about this? I saw it on TikTok. And I'm like, well, okay, but does that make it real? I mean, so on. So I think that as a society nowadays, things have to really be unusual for it to rise to our attention level. And we tend to, forget about things very quickly. It'll be right there in the forefront for a little bit, and then it'll be gone. And I think it talked a bit about that in this article, about how, this whole COVID phenomenon for a little while was really a big deal. And then it just sort of went away. And it's become more normalized now. And I think another part of how all that happens is that certainly in the United States, we have such polarized politics and because of the way information presented, we can really silo things. And so we can just look at liberal issues or just look at conservative issues, and they rarely cross over. And if they do, then oftentimes it's, oh, well, here's an example of what the enemy is saying, the other people are saying. And I think that does a real disservice to us, at least here in the States, because we get a very biased view of what's going on. So then in terms of trying to problem solve things, you start to wonder, well, what are the problems? If you're looking at things from a conservative standpoint, the problems are going to be defined very different than from more of a liberal standpoint. And so when you look at on a larger scale how to solve a problem, I think it becomes very complex, because how do you get someone who has this one point of view to recognize this other point of view? And it's certainly, I think COVID brought that to the forefront, but certainly the climate change issue is a big part of that, because within certain political or ideological groups, it doesn't even exist, or it's a
we're
myth.
having connection problems. I'm so sorry. I think we'll be back in a moment.
Okay.
Yeah, when our politicians were at first calling COVID the Chinese flu, it was not only a slur against another country, but made people think, oh, it's just a flu. I don't have to take extraordinary measures. Yeah, so that was one element of what we're dealing with here. Sharif, love to have your remarks on the topic.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. First, I would like to give thanks to give me the opportunity to discuss about the Peak Daniels navigating late recognitions of challenges in emerging economy. I do want to focus on emerging economy because I am from emerging economy. And I want to give special thanks to you and Tandos, because you give me opportunities to get a new experience from North America. Just last 2 months, I was in Silicon Valley and I was in University of British Columbia and Stanford, and trying to learn from this ecosystem. And I understand how the Western world can solve many complex problems. And I want to introduce some audience with you, because which is very important uh, for our today's discussions, because what we are doing actually, World Talent Economic Forum actually solving problem. With whom? With the young and talented group of peoples. Only in Bangladesh, I'm from Bangladesh, we have 57% youth, around 90 million people. They are young, they are youth, and they make actually a story. They actually solve a very complex problem. And I think this is the new case study for developed nations. So what they did actually, that this is very common discussions that emerging economy has corruptions, emerging economy has political problem, and last 15 years we don't have democracy, we don't have freedom of speech, we have lot of corruptions and many more things. But uh, uh, this is the long story of our countries or the emerging economy. Uh, but according to the discussion of the today's topic, actually, Pig Daniel refers to the phenomenon where emerging economy fail to recognize or address critical challenge timely. So, restoring the democracy, restoring the institutions of the countries, we actually cannot recognize in the early stage, and we lose around 15 valuable years from our life to restore, to understand this problem. So that's why, as a think tank, Tando is a very valuable for emerging economy, because you open up the eyes and figure out the problems, and you help the government or academia to solve the critical problem. So when it occurs, actually, we have decision-making problem. The decision-making problems in terms of democratic decisions. So how we get our government, it's not a democratic process. How we continue our government, that was not a democratic process. So whole 170 million people, we actually go under a process where we lose our own life controls. But why I'm discussing about these things uh, in this forum, because my forum for talent economy, I do focus on the futuristic views, I do focus on the young and talented peoples, I do focus on public trust, I do focus on people life improvements. So that is the particular area I find in 5th August, there is a very interesting happen in Bangladesh, because our previous dictators, governments, she actually ran away. Because of what? Because of the revolutions of the youth, the young people. I think this is the history, and everybody should learn. The young people, I'm just sharing my students, my community, they come to the public, they come to the street. Millions of people come to the street that we want to restore my democracy. We want to restore our economical transparency. We want to restore our human rights and everything. Long time, yes, USA actually is supporting this kind of initiative. USA want a transparent elections in Bangladesh. On the other hand, because of the geopolitics, because we are just beside India, India do not want a freedom of speech for Bangladesh, or this kind of geopolitical issues, we lose our control. So this is the way our few generations actually go through this process, what you call this Pig Daniels and all of the theoretical aspects. But look at the new generations. Yes, there are several factors like politicals, problem, like we do not have enough data, we do not have social resistance, and many more things. The youth has encouraged, youth has the ability to take the responsibility, and after a long fight, even though like many of the young people, I think more than 1,000 young people, they died in the street. Then around 20,000 people, many young people lose eyes, lose hands or eggs because of these problems. We don't have democracy, but after long fight, after like we actually win. We win means the young people win, the new generation win, and new generations come to the political power. It's very interesting discussions that a 24 years or 30 years young people, they took the ministry's responsibility, and they do not only take the responsibility, they give opportunity to the most talented people, Nobel laureate like Dr. Muhammad Yunus, and he become my country heads. They invite many uh, like educated and honest and sincere peoples to their teams, and this is the combinations of youth and combinations of intellectual communities who can restore our democracy, who can restore our critical problems. So this is the real life problem I just want to share with you. Now we have the responsibility, the Tando Fellows, right? Many famous scholars, professors, academicians from around the world, you join in the Tando. So you can help my country. You can help my community. And especially I want to give thanks. Climate change is another biggest problem for Bangladesh. Climate change is the biggest problem for emerging economy. So Tando taking the initiative to develop 1,000 leaders, and they may solve the climate related problem in the emerging economy. So I want to welcome you all in this revolutionary activities, because Western world, like North America, like global North, you have your own knowledge, you have technology, you have resource. This is very interesting time. You can use your expertise, your knowledge, your everything to solve this critical problem. Maybe you can help us to rewrite our constitutions. Maybe you can help us to restructure our Islamic finance and financial institutions. Maybe you can help our healthcare system or our educational system. So this is actually a way of development. Problem come, always history, from history we can learn the young generation, the youth community, they sacrifice and they restore the national activities. So I request all of the Tando fellows, our audience, all of the peoples, because after 2 months of my learning from Stanford University, from Tando, I come back Bangladesh. So let's focus on Bangladesh. Let's focus on the youth community. This is very valuable opportunity for everyone. I share my audience, right? The young, talent economy for young, youth community. Let's help the youth community with your knowledge. I know Bangladeshi people are very emotional. I know maybe many sectors we don't have enough knowledge, but you have. Let's collaborate and make a new nations. And it can be example for other countries. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, we'll do that. And I appreciate you bringing up the recent revolution, if I may call it that, in Bangladesh, because it had not occurred to me that this was an example of our peak denial thing. The young people in Bangladesh did take the problem into their own hands, and whether they did it early enough or exactly at the right time or too late in the context of our current discussion, that would be another question to talk about at another time. But it was very enlightening that you brought that up. Now, the question of political polarization, Richard raises that question, and that goes along in the United States with diminution in the trust level of our general economy and rising crime rates. And if so, polarization and social atomization go hand in hand. People are afraid to go out. People spend too much time online. They don't. There are a lot of articles about how it's more difficult these days to form close friendships. And the political polarization means that as soon as you're afraid to utter a position on anything, because immediately the other side will say, oh, that's a conspiracy of the liberals, it's a conspiracy of the conservatives. And it doesn't matter what you say, somebody is going to take it as a political statement and attack it as fake news or a conspiracy or communism or some other kind of curse word. So it's, in the old days, you would have had close friends where you could share your opinion, and if it did not align precisely with the conservative or the liberal official line. And these days, it's more difficult to do that. So it may be expected that people will form their own reality, their own way of spelling words, and have instead of a consensus reality, we have as many different realities as we have people in the country, and it's just so extremely unfortunate. Well, we also have with us Tondo manager Rachel Howell. Rachel, you have some comments on the topic?
Thank you, Fred. I've been listening, and it's really fascinating because we are dealing with so many problems that we in the past have not been aware of. And so all of a sudden we have access to a worldwide problems and issues that are happening, wars, and raising my daughter's 26 years old now, and raising her during this time when she was an avid Bernie Sanders fan, and then watching her over this past 8 years just basically want to withdraw from politics and withdraw from in a sense reality, except for that little social media reality that. And I think that's when you talk about the peak denial, which is really interesting. When we're so overwhelmed, we tend to withdraw. And then when we hear like a media source that resonates with us, that's what we're attracted to. And so, and if it alleviates our fears, even if it's, and if it minimizes the reality and the, that's what we're attracted to. And so that's how this media starts, especially spreading misinformation, starts becoming the preferred media, because we don't get anxious when we're listening to that media, because it's saying exactly what we want to hear, that these issues are really not big problems. But then when you I can remember, reading, unless you read the New York Times, which, it's kind of questionable at times, but, you can't find articles that really go in depth about some of the issues that we're dealing with. And so all you get are these little sound bites. And if you don't make the effort to do the research and to, kind of dig down the rabbit hole, then that's all a headline and a couple of sentences, and it's on to the next issue. So it's a really interesting topic, and I appreciate you inviting me, Fred. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. We have time for another round of concluding remarks, and I'd appreciate it if the panelists focus their concluding remarks on what can be done about this. And Richard, I know you need to go soon. Would you want to kick it off?
Sure. Well, I think I alluded to one of the things. I think it would help if our educational system would focus more on things like logic and scientific method, and helping people have critical thinking skills rather than just sort of the group think. And that was one of the things I thought about when we were all discussing this, is that there's a lot of research about group think and how, as long as you're part of that group, your anxiety level goes down. But then if you step out of that, people start to criticize you and your anxiety level goes up. So I think it helps if people can be better educated about, how being in these silos and having such limited information is not good for our society. Another thing I thought about, especially when Sharif was talking, is that, when a person is having to fight to get food, or water, or just basic survival things, it's pretty hard to worry about things like climate change. It's off in the distance. So I think as societies are able to provide better for the people in their society, then I think you can start to look at more global issues and try and problem solve them. The other thing I didn't mention earlier was, you were talking, Fred, about resilience. And in terms of clinical psychology, we look at a certain percentage, about 10 to 15% of people who have been through traumas are considered resilient individuals. And some of the things that make them resilient is they're able to face a particular problem. They don't just put their head in the sand. They face it. They look at it in a flexible manner rather than being rigid. And they also have an optimistic view of things. And so I don't know how much that applies to global phenomenons, but certainly I think as long as you can face a problem and then look at it in a flexible way, maybe there's ways to solve some of these issues rather than getting concrete and missing some other opportunities that come along because of your closed-minded views. So
I think you really hit the nail on the head. You took me back to a university I worked at where there was a program, a PhD in leadership program. And the people enrolled in that program were all people persons, right? They were not logical thinkers. They were, interpersonal kinds of folks. And I had to teach the statistics course. You say statistics to those folks, you might as well gag them with a spoon. And I really thought many times subsequently that if I had to do it again, I would call the course Critical and Quantitative Reasoning, and to do exactly what you recommended there, Richard. That's how, and it would be more palatable to them, and introduce topics that would lead more logically to the t-test instead of just jumping right into it. So thanks for that input. Vicki, you want to have offer some further comments?
Yeah, I'll pick up on that, and I'll say that I honestly wish that I could run my classrooms in that logical and critical thinking approach. Because that's who I am. But the ramifications at the end of the semester for me, and we can call it short-term thinking. I have tenure. I'm good. I'm settled. How's that? But I do have those short-term ramifications. And if the example I gave, if I push that student or those two students and I say, but your logic, your critical thinking needs some rethinking, because I'm going to try to phrase it graciously. They're not even going to buy that. because I've said you need to rethink it. But if I say your logic, your critical thinking is way off base, then all of a sudden I have judged them for their own critical thinking, which I think is wrong, if you will, but I never use that word. So I feel like the short-term ramifications for me as the educator are too strong, too significant, if you will. And I think I'm always, so that's when I started, I'm guilty of this because I'm keeping that in mind too. But I think even in our classrooms, we run so many of our classrooms on a game basis. It's the word a few years ago that was edutainment. So
Okay.
that we are continuing to entertain while we educate, because that's what, for me, my generation of students has grown to expect. I've sat in as a participant in some of these edutainment exercises. I can't do it. I'm the type of person that says, okay, why don't we go through this scientific process and get from A to Z, but let's not game it. Let's not gamify it. So I can't be the participant, but I can actually, when I have to now, and I do have to now, I can be a leader on the edutainment side. I can run it. I can have fun doing it, but I sincerely don't think it's the best thing for me or for my students. So I thought about that even with Rachel's comments with Richard and Rachel coming in on that, this idea that except for our social media reality, we know that social media is giving us the snippet, and that I can be entertained in today's world with a snippet, but I'm not going to drill down into any of these issues. So it is that, I think, Rachel, your word was it's a soundbite. And that's, I think, societally where we are. But I know, Fred, that doesn't answer your question. I tried to write down your question. What can be done about it? That's like, to me, that's the bazillion-dollar question right there. I hear where Robert's coming from, but in reality, I can't deliver on that. I wish I could.
And I believe that another contributor to the great inflation problem is universities on a budget. They don't give you graders and teaching assistants anymore. So students bring their grade gripes directly to the professor, who has many pressures for publishing, committee work, heavy course load, and you don't want to spend your time arguing with the students. So you just say, okay, you can have a B. It's understandable. Yeah.
But let me just throw out there, just to keep reality in perspective here. If I don't respond the way that not all the students, many of them want, it goes to the next level. So it goes to my department chair. And it's like, really? And so then, yes, I just go, whatever the university wants me to do, I'm going to go ahead and do it. Even if it goes against my own compass. How's that? But yeah, thank you.
So how can we get
Brett, I need to sign off.
understood?
Thank you so much for
Thanks
having
so much
me
for
a part of this. I really
Okay.
appreciate it.
No, you need
Take
to go to
care.
class and
Yeah.
enjoy your class.
Thank
So
you.
how can we get people to turn away from sound bites and turn more toward reading long form journalism? Because as Rachel said, that would be one way to have people engage in depth with an issue instead of bite the sound. Sharif, what do you think?
For my point of views, actually, when we discuss about logical argument, and when we discuss about different kind of technology, innovations, and educational factors, we have to think the global communities that all of our developments for human progressions. So human progressions depends on better educations, better faculties, better technology. So global communities need to invest more for educations. Global communities, the businessmen and organizations has to bring more success for the youth communities. That is the things actually World Talent Economic Forum doing. We are convincing bank, government, financial institutions, corporations, how they can invest more for educations, because education is the key, and you people are valuable for us. So any kind of barriers we get from this ecosystem, we need to overcome for these particular issues. And I am very much optimistic about the emerging economies youth. They are, maybe some of the people say they are illogical. Why they sacrificing their life? People do not know. But they have a very positive views about their country, about their society. So I request all of you, let's work together and make some progress, especially for educations, for global goods.
You know,
That is my
Sharif,
closing.
I was about to give you a hard time because everybody in the world knows that people should spend more money on education. And it's, not really a contribution to the discussion to say there should be more spent. But then you continued to say that you've been talking to people in all sectors about how to spend more on education. So bravo. I really admire that. Way to go. The other thing is maybe it's difficult to get people to read long form journalism and scholarship, but we do know that younger people are more into videos than into reading. And Sharif, you have now hosted well over 500 of these video casts, right? And
1400 plus.
Sorry, how many?
1400 plus. 1400 plus.
Whoa.
Wow.
And you would not be doing, they all last at least an hour, and you would not be doing this if you thought that people were not watching them, right? So that is room for optimism, because there's an ample number of people around the world who are willing to watch not just a 10-second TikTok, but a 1 hour long educational video cast. That is really wonderful.
Mhm.
Rachel,
Yeah,
you have a concluding comment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of solutions, I think Sharif is right. It has to start at that education, and it has to start at the lowest levels. That, perhaps designing a video type, some sort of module, especially in the elementary, middle school, they're looking for very, very simple modules that they can incorporate. You can't ask them to do anything extra just because they're so overwhelmed. But to design some sort of module that starts with critical thinking, whether it just even one question, and then can proceed, because just to ask the question, even if they don't actually go and do the assignment, just hearing the question, and then it's kind of that repetitive piece that if we could think of a way to do it, to just be able to send it out and say, hey, if you're looking for something to fill your 10 minutes, here's a quick module to get your students thinking. So that's my contribution.
I think everyone on the panel will be happy to know that one of the modules
You
in
froze.
our Tondo certificate program in climate leadership is called critical thinking.
Yes.
Did I come back yet?
Yes, in and out.
Modules is called critical thinking. Anyway, here we are at the 1 hour mark, and thank you so much for participating. We had some confusion about the time zones, so the panel was smaller than expected, but the discussion was much more stellar than I even expected. So this has been great, and big thanks to all of you. Sharif, thanks for hosting this one and the 1,400 other ones. And we will
Thank you.
sign off. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred.